All right, let's try this again. So if you stuck with me for a moment, appreciate you sticking with me. I'm going to repeat a bit of what I said because I'm going to try and put this on YouTube after it's done. And I would like some continuity. So in short, OBS just crashed on me and interrupted the stream, which is kind of obnoxious. I'm not really sure what happened to make it suddenly so unstable, but it's been happening over the last couple weeks. I've been tweaking with things, and I guess I've fiddled with the wrong knobs. But let's start over. So I'm Matt Lehman. I'm a software engineer, and I do Python development regularly. I'm working tonight on a software as a service that I run called College Conductor, and we are going to be working with background tasks and hooking up background tasks into a production system. And since the site that I run is all based around Python, we're using a system called Celery. So the goal here today is to work on this issue 359 in my project, and walk through how we get background tasks hooked into a live site. The initial bit of context that I mentioned in the first version of the stream was that this is business process stuff that's going to keep the data in sync for the service that I run with what's actually out there, with the services that I'm trying to pull from. Sorry. So the goal today is to test out this background processing work locally and make sure that it actually works, and then hook it into Ansible, which is my deployment tool, to prove that it works in a staging environment. And then finally, we'll actually deploy it all the way out to production, ideally, if we have time and OBS cooperates. So let's get started. So where I want to start from tonight is with Celery beat. And I guess the real place we should start probably is the documentation. So Celery is a background worker system that uses a queue, which is in my case RabbitMQ. There are other queues that you can configure, but RabbitMQ is a pretty stable choice, and the one that I've configured Celery to use. And so the current production system has Celery worker processes that will handle tasks that get triggered by a number of things that can happen on the site, different user interactions, things that I don't want to have happen in a normal request. They get pushed off to workers that can happen in the background. But what doesn't happen right now is things that need to just happen on a cycle. So we're going to use Celery's scheduling tool, which is called Celery Beat. As you can see here, Celery Beat is a scheduler. And we're going to add the schedule to the settings of Conductor and make sure that it really works. I'm going to even test it on a dummy task that we're going to create just for the purpose of testing this out and see how it goes. And once we're convinced that the settings are correct, then we can move on to moving it into Ansible and then moving it into production. So let's begin. The first thing we're going to need to actually run Celery Beat is this setting called Beat Schedule. And if we go over to I'm using Vim here, where all the work is happening, and looking at the settings file. So Django is configured to use a bunch of settings, and a lot of stuff is built off this. And there's many ways to do. Gotta be kidding me. No? Okay, good. Ha. Sorry, I thought OBS had crashed on me again, but it's really just something I noticed in the corner. Apologies. So Django is managed by a lot of settings, and the settings are Python files that have actual Python dictionaries and variables and all sorts of things in them that you can configure and use along the way. So this is where any extra stuff can go. Any extensions that you add can put settings in there, and it's exactly where we're going to put our settings this evening. So the coming over to what we need to run, we need to incorporate this beat schedule thing. That is the setting that we need to add to the system. So if we jump down, well, that's not where I want to stick with the guide, because there is an example of what this will look like. So here is our beat schedule. It's a Python dictionary. It takes as a key value the thing that you want to run, and then it takes some settings for that. And so I'm going to have something very similar to this, but there are some differences. With the way that Django is hooked up into, or that Celery is hooked up into my Django project, all Celery settings are prefixed with this capital Celery stuff that you see here. So we can start by saying Celery, I'm already forgetting this, beat schedule. And start with just an empty dictionary. And yeah, so nothing is happening so far. It's totally expected, but we do want something to happen eventually. So let's go ahead and add our next thing, our next layer. What name do it? For the purpose of getting this going, let's just have I'm going to call this test. Not very meaningful name, but you'll see why in a second. To make sure that Celery beat is even working at all, I want to have a task that is at the same area as my regular task, but isn't actually doing a bunch of work. I don't want to be messing with that part. This is really just a step to see, can I get the extra tool to even operate? So we're going to put our task name there in a second. And if we come back over to the documentation, we're going to set a schedule. And just to see this run, we're going to set it to something really short, to say every 10 seconds or something like that, which is what the default numbers are. So we're going to do 10. And I think that will be enough once we actually put a value into this task then. And so if you're wondering what just happened there, I use Black, which is an auto formatting tool, and Black thought that line was too short, and it tried to condense it and be friendly. Not always what you want, but Black is a benefit most of the time. So let's look at where we're going to pull from. So the place that has tasks, if I can type, come on now, where are you? Sorry, we'll get there in just a second. Trackers, I was thinking it was called scanners, but I named the app trackers. So this is where we did the work last time. And if you were following in earlier streams, this is what I showed off of creating this particular task. And this is actually ultimately what we want to run, but not right now. What I want to run right now is a new task that I'm going to make a task that has really nothing in it except we'll call it a dummy task. And it will take basically no parameters or anything. It's just going to print I. Hopefully that will show up in our logs. This should be enough to configure that other settings file with this information. So if we go back over to our settings base file and where that task name is set, we're going to put the full module path to this task. I think that's right. This is where it becomes a bit of an experiment. I don't really remember off the top of my head. So I believe it's going to be trackers, tasks, and then dummy task would be the full module path to the task. So I think with this much configuration, we should be able to test if Celery beat is doing what we want. So we're going to go over here And I'm already in my virtual environment, so Celery is already an available command here. And it's got Celery beat up here. So what we're going to do is look at the options for Celery beat briefly to see what kind of parameters we ultimately want to pass into this tool to get this going. I think minimally we need this app parameter, which is the app that Celery is configured with in Django, and that doesn't really make a lot of sense unless we look at this file. So there is a Celery app that's been connected together that is available for us to use. It's a module, and that's what we need to point to when we start Celery. And by having the Celery app connected to Celery beat, what that's going to say is, like, here are all the registered tasks that come along with Conductor, and to know where to even look. And I'm going to cheat a little bit and go back to our Celery conf because I don't really remember. Okay, so this is the name of this Celery app, is Conductor : Celery app. So we should be able to say Celery beat and app Conductor Celery app. And again, if you have any questions about what I'm doing, because I sort of stumble through some of these aspects because I don't remember, it's been a while since I've done them, or maybe you just have no idea what I'm talking about and you need more context, ask away. The chat's open on the side there. It's really fully intended for you to use it. I want to try and teach as much as get stuff done as well. So this is meant to be two-way, I hope. But if you want to lurk, that's cool too. So let's start. Okay. So we started Celery beat. We have our schedule. I'm hoping that we see something come up. I was hoping to see some kind of log, and it could be that I'm just not using the logger properly. So maybe that print wasn't really doing what I was hoping it would do. Let's cancel that. This will be really fun if I don't actually get anything working, right? So let's. What are we missing? We're missing a log level of info. I guess we could use capital info to be consistent. And I didn't actually use a logger over in the task file, so we could go back over there and we can say we could import the logging module, and to get our logger, we want logger is logging.getLogger. And this is Python conventional naming stuff. But now at the bottom, we're going to say logger info. Am I running? It's a reasonable question to ask. Okay. So let's try again. If I did this right, so scheduler sending due task test, that's what we named it in the schedule. It's sending it, but I don't know where the log is going. Maybe that's okay for now. What was really important is to see that Celery beat is working. So this tells me two things. Celery beat is working on the system, so we at least have the dependencies all installed correctly. And we minimally got the settings right to show that trackers, tasks, dummy task, that was the right name. So what we want to do now is translate this to the real settings. I'm going to stop that for now. So I think I'm convinced and can say we're done with that guy. And I don't need this logger anymore. we can come back and add it later, but I'm fairly confident. So let's go back down to our Celery settings. And now we need to name it for real. So before it was named test. That's a crummy name. I'm going to name it something a little bit more meaningful for what this is actually doing. It's the common app. And again, don't worry too much about the domain. This is something specific to college admissions, but it's a common app scan. That's what this really is. And the task is now we need to map it up with the actual name that's over here, which is scan common app schools. Here's where I should throw in a word of caution. It is pretty easy to spell this wrong and then have Celery Beat not actually do what you think it does. And I only say this because this has happened to me out of experience, where you deploy it to production, you think something's going to work correctly, and it doesn't actually work because you had a typo. And so something that you expected to be running is not actually running. So be careful if you're going to use Celery and Celery Beat. Okay. The other thing is I really don't want this to run every 10 seconds. Now, we don't really need that. What we really need is to run it on the frequency that I want it to run it. There are a couple of ways that you can run tasks in Celery Beat. One way is as with a schedule here. So what this did is said Celery Beat started up, and the schedule was run every 10 seconds since we started up. That's fine if you have sort of short tasks or a short delta of time. But where this falls down is if Celery Beat were to restart, then the timer sort of starts over again. So for this task that I want to run once a week, it's sort of ridiculous to say run on a 7 days from now. That's just not really going to work because if I ever do a deployment, it restarts the clock again. So that's not the goal. So let's look at what else Celery Beat can do. There is another method of doing this. So the way that we defaulted here was this time delta. I think that's what it is if you don't specify anything. You can also use the actual time delta stuff from the datetime module as another way to configure this schedule. But again, not really what we're interested in. What we want to do is this Crontab thing. So this is where Celery can imitate the venerable cron program. Cron, if you're not an old school, long-time Linux, Solaris, or whatever sort of person, is a time-based system, as the name might imply, that runs things on a schedule. So sounds familiar, right? The reason I'm using Celery Beat over cron is that Celery Beat already knows about my tasks. It would be, if I had tasks that were running that had nothing to do with Python, cron is a very stable and solid choice and worthy of consideration. But I'm in the Python land, so I'm going to continue to use the tools that are specified in Python with Celery. So here we get to the section that's pertinent to my purposes. And this is actually pretty close to what I care about. Interestingly, here a little sidebar, you can run on solar schedules. I didn't know this until today. I think this is amazing and totally bizarre at the same time. I don't know why you would run tasks on a solar timeline, but kudos to you, Celery, for making that an option, I guess. So we're coming back here and we're going to do this import now of the Crontab import from Celery schedules. And we're going to add when I want to run this. So that's the next step. So let's come up to the top where we do imports. And I order my imports so that standard library imports are first, and then third-party library imports are another block, and then local imports are third. It doesn't matter for settings. I don't have any local imports. But if you're wondering why did I not put it up here and put it here instead, that's because of the grouping conventions that I like to follow that I think are, I don't know if they're PEP 8 conventions, but they're the standard set that people like to follow in Python. So from Celery schedules, I think it was, yeah, schedules, import Crontab. That's what we need. And my editor is complaining that Crontab is not used right now. Makes sense, we haven't used it yet. So let's come back to the bottom, and where we have the schedule, we're going to replace 10 seconds with a Crontab entry. And I don't remember the date of the syntax, so okay. I roughly want to run this at a time where it's not going to impact anybody. So I'm going to pick a Sunday at the wee hours of the morning. So I'm going to say day of the week is 0. That represents Sunday, at least according to this. I can go read the docs, but the example is sufficient to clue me in on what I really care about. So day of week is 0 for Sunday, and the hour, I don't care. Let's say 2 in the morning, and the minute probably defaults to 0, but let's just specify it anyway. Actually, yeah, maybe if we didn't specify it, if it functions truly like cron, it might have tried to run it every minute if we didn't specify the minute, so that might actually be a good thing. Okay, I think what we'll do now is run Celery beat again and confirm that it at least starts up, because if I got it wrong, it's going to blow up. Great, started. Seems like it's going, so that's good enough for me. Okay, so what's next? The next thing we need to do is get Celery beat into the actual infrastructure part of this. That's the whole reason for this stream this evening. The first part was really just the setup for how do you even get Celery beat configured. So I'm going to stop first though and do two things. I'm going to remove this Celery beat schedule. I'll explain that in a minute. And I'm going to go ahead and commit the schedule we just deduced. So add Celery beat schedule. And this is for issue number 359. And I'll push that up. And I'm pushing it up for a reason. So actually, I use a bunch of aliases when I'm doing development. So to translate what I just did, I have aliases for the Git version control tool. So GD is git diff. GAA is git add all, which is this file that we cared about. GC is git commit, and GP is git push, in case you're wondering what those were. They're conveniences. If you type them out enough, aliases actually turn out to be a really honking useful thing. So if you're not using the command line much, you should check those out. I can talk more about those in a different session. So we've tested it out locally, and we've added the schedule to the settings. So now we're at this step right here. We're going to configure our Ansible tasks. And I'm not actually sure how much task configuration we really even have to do. We shall see. So you saw I kind of cheated a little earlier and looked at a pre-existing configuration file. The way that the system works, the way that College Conductor runs, is that the different parts of the different processes that need to run are managed through a process manager called Supervisor D. Supervisor D is a tool that really just, its sole job is to keep processes running or manage them, their start and stop states, and hook with the init system so that if you ever had to restart a machine, it would automatically restart all the processes. But what you have to do with Supervisor is tell it the parts that you want to run. And what we're looking at here in this Celery conf j2 file, which you can see at the bottom is the file name. You'll notice a couple things about this. This is in a templates directory, and the ending here is J2, which stands for Jinja2. So if you look closely at this, you'll actually see some template markup syntax. So this is hooking into Ansible. I run all of my deploys through Ansible. Ansible is a tool that uses a series of YAML files and SSHs into your servers, and actually using the YAML files as their instructions with a series of plugins will step by step install the things that you want to install. So along the way, some of those tasks that you want to install are particular files that you want to be put on your server at a certain location at the end of the system. So why don't we look at where the Celery conf j2 file is used in the playbooks, and you'll have a much better idea of what I'm talking about, I hope. So Ansible has this notion of playbooks, which is it's their jargon. Everybody has jargon, right? And if you are a chef user, you have cookbooks or something like that. If you're Puppet, I don't remember what Puppet calls there, but each of these deployment systems has their own lingo for how you're doing your infrastructure as code. And Ansible calls theirs playbooks. And it's really a set of steps that you run that all look like these lists of YAML instructions, and that's what you care about. So we're looking at the worker role, which is the steps that it takes to make a server behave like a worker. And right now I only have one server, so I've split out the roles to give a logical separation of you can be a load balancer, or you can be an application server, or you could be a worker, or any of these things. And in a future where I had more traffic and needed to add more servers and increase my capacity by adding more application servers or more workers, depending on what kind of work it was done, it'd be possible to specify server A and server B are going to be my workers, server C and server D are going to be my app servers. Right now, it's all in one server. It's because it's a small SaaS that's still getting going. So that's what's going on here. But that's what roles are about, is about dividing. Ansible focuses on dividing responsibility into these role categories so that you can target different machines ultimately. So this playbook doesn't have a lot in it. It really does one major thing of taking the template file, the Celery conf j2 file, and putting it at this path on the target server. Ultimately, it will live in confd-celery.conf. And that is where Supervisor, when it starts up, will look for configuration files. That's what conf stands for. It will look for configuration files, it will read them and start running. Okay, context out of the way. Back over here. So this is a template, and it's not actually a finalized configuration file. The part that makes it a template is this stuff down here. When the environment is set up, there are certain variables and information that I need to pass into the worker, and this could be secrets, this could be just configuration about where the servers are and where they need to talk to, things that can change. And that is why this needs to be configurable. So Ansible will know what those things are at the time where it's doing a deployment, and then can take this Django environment thing, which is a set of data, and write out the data as a template with some, using this kind of Jinja 2 syntax of saying, here's the environment variable, here's its value. And it puts it out, and so the final output that you would get on the target machine is going to look like, like this, but with a bunch of environment variables listed below it in the same sort of syntax of variable name equal some string. Okay, I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, tell me to explain it more, because I'm happy to. So what we need is a little bit of copying, because Celery Beat is going to be configured almost identically to an actual Celery worker. So notice at the top here, we're running the command that we're running. This is the virtual environment where all the stuff, packages are installed. We're running from the bin directory, and there's Celery. This is the same thing that we ran over here. This Celery command, it's the same one. And in this case, it's running the worker. We're going to change it to beat, and we're going to change the parameters that go into it. But a lot of this stuff is going to stay the same, because we're still the same user. It's still sort of the same supervisor D options that will go with it. So it is a lot of, it's very much the same kind of beast. So we do need to change that it's now beat instead of worker. We want to keep that it's log level info. We don't need this concurrency thing. So here's an important note about Celery Beat. Celery Beat, since it's a scheduler, and it actually even warns us if we go back to the documentation. Let's do that. It warns us if somewhere, see if I can find it. It warns us not to have multiple Celery Beat runners. The reason is pretty simple. If you have two things that are trying to run on a schedule, thing A and thing B don't know about each other. So they can't coordinate to say, like, did you start the schedule or did you start the schedule? So Celery Beat is a single point of failure kind of system because of that. So be cautious. But that's a problem that I've run on sites that have millions of users and steady traffic all day long. And even in those systems, Celery Beat having only one of them was okay. It was pretty solid and did the job. So what else do we need here? I think we want to have a few options, and let's come back down to what Celery Beat even offered. I want to be able to specify the schedule. So earlier you might have noticed there was a file that was created in my local directory called celerybeat-schedule. And that is a little bit database that Celery Beat keeps around, so that if you stop it and start it up again, I think in theory that it has information about, it can be smart about not sending out too much information. So it's a useful thing to have around, and it always gets created anyway, so I need to be able to specify where it should go. Otherwise, it might try and write it to an area that it doesn't have write access to, and that kind of thing. So I'm going to come over here and say that we want the schedule to be at temp Celery Beat schedule, is I think what I'm looking for. What else do we need or want? I think I also want this thing right here, a PID file. PID file is a useful thing for like long-running processes. I mean, you can see what the documentation says here. the program won't start if this file already exists and the PID is still alive. So what it's trying to guarantee is coming back to that only being one worker thing. You don't want to have more than one of these running amok and running tasks over and over again, like that are competing with each other. So I think the PID file is kind of a safeguard to say, hey, wait a minute, somebody else is already running. Maybe they didn't close down properly. Who knows why they're still running, but just to play it safe, I'm not going to run right now because there is a process that exists that matches the ID that is stored in this file. So again, we're going to put that at an attempt directory. Celery beat, what did they call it? Celery beat.pid. Okay. And then let's see, come back down here, and we want to have a different log file name. I don't want to clobber the two logs. But I'm hopeful that everything else is correct. Pretty easy, right? I hope you thought it was easy. Just I guess it gets very easy if you're copying from some previous stuff. This might be daunting if you were configuring this self for the first time. So maybe that's a lesson that this repository is open source. Well, okay, it's shared source. It's actually, there's a little clause in there called the common clause that says if you're going to start up a business in this, you can't copy this to like straight up verbatim copy to start a competing business. But by and large, I don't plan that any of you are actually going to do that and start a college admissions side business to compete with me. So everything that's out there is visible for you to use as a reference. It's under my GitHub account /conductor is the repository where this all lives, and you can use this to your heart's content to reference it and see if there are good ideas or bad ideas, and just look at the code and study it, and ask me questions on Twitter if you want, if you don't understand something or want some more knowledge. So if you want to learn how to get supervisor D going, or why I did certain things a certain way, you can study that information. I generally try and do a good git commit log too, so if you know Git and can look at Git blame and some of the history, you might be able to even deduce why I made certain decisions. But I think this will be enough, I'm hoping, to get going. So we now have a modified playbook thing, and I'm going to commit it because I'm pretty happy with what's there. And so add Ansible configuration for Celery beat. And this is for, what number was that, 359? Yeah, 359. Okay. So now I get to maybe some more interesting part of what do you do when you're adding something new to your infrastructure. That is a fairly scary prospect. So a lot of systems, especially if you do this professionally, will break up development, software development products, software as a service, into multiple stages. You kind of graduate from development into, some groups have a QA environment, like my day job we have QA, and then we have another tier called staging, and then we finally get to production. For College Conductor, I have a 3-tier system. So everything I'm doing locally is my development environment, and then I have what I refer to as my staging setup, and then finally, when I'm fully confident in my staging setup, I can go all the way to production. So staging is just is sort of what it sounds like, where you stage everything and you get it ready, and you're testing out of is this working correctly? Am I confident that it's not going to mess up my user base? And it just increases your confidence in the changes you've made, because what I'm running on my Mac and what is running in DigitalOcean right now are two different things. They're not even the same operating system. This is running Mac OS, and my operating system on DigitalOcean is Ubuntu 18.04. So the goal with having different kind of targets along the way is to progressively get more and more like your production setup. So I have something that is a similar environment to my production setup that I've tried to configure as closely as I can to what my DigitalOcean stuff is like. And to do that, I'm using Vagrant. Vagrant is a tool that wraps around a virtual machine setup and lets you download virtual machines, start them up, connect to them so that you can actually either do development on them. But I'm actually, in my circumstance, using Vagrant as a deployment target. That's a little strange, but it's partly because I'm doing this on a ultra shoestring budget. So if I did a closer to staging kind of environment, what I could have is a website out actually on DigitalOcean that was another DigitalOcean droplet, which is their name for virtual machines, and deploy all of my code to a staging environment out there in the cloud. And that would be a good thing, but it would double my hosting costs. And because, again, I'm doing this on super shoestring budget, I chose instead to make a virtual machine locally on my machine that gets as close to that as possible without costing me anything. So I already, before the stream started, I have I ran Vagrant up, which is the conventional name to start the virtual machine and get it running. And just to prove that it's running, I can SSH into it. Yeah, I have security packages that can be updated, but this is local, so who cares? Although there's probably some exploit out there that can take advantage of my machine. Anyway, so this is now available as a target. So if we look at the Vagrant file that I have in my repository, what is it doing? Vagrant has a command built into it called provision, and it hooks up into a number of provisioning tools. Provisioning tools can be just shell scripts, or they can be Ansible or Puppet or Chef or Salt or whatever tool you Salt Stack or whatever tool you use to do your actual deployment. Since I told you I'm using Ansible, that's what's going to run here. So I have a very specific playbook called my development playbook, and I have the roles that I want to be running, which is my DB servers and my web servers. And notice they're pointing to the same Vagrant virtual machine, this web01. And then I point some more stuff at it, and then I had to do a little fiddling to get key stuff working, because what Vagrant is about to do when I run Vagrant provision is it's going to invoke Ansible, and Ansible is going to literally SSH into my virtual machine and treat it like any other thing that it would solve for. So that's what happens when I run Vagrant provision. So we'll see. Let's get it going, and you can watch it scroll by as I talk through some of the stuff. And hopefully it doesn't blow up on me. Sometimes it does. And that's why you have a staging server, to catch the things before they get all the way to production. Because if you solve the problems here, if you solve the problems in your staging environment, they're a lot less likely to happen in your production environment. Or, maybe better stated, you'll at least know how to fix the issues, because you'll have had to fix them here first. And this has the nice benefit of you don't screw yourself over. There have been many times where I've run something on my staging server and Node didn't install properly, or some package didn't go, Datadog didn't go quite right. And when I dug into it, it turned out I had needed to upgrade something. And once I had that upgrade, everything went smoothly. By the time I went over to my production environment and ran my actual deploy, everything was smooth. And that's what you want. You want this to be your safety net for that. Okay, so what we're staring at here as it kind of scrolls by is Ansible Output. So I told you that, and we'll scroll back up to check it out. Ansible starts up by saying, I'm going to run this playbook. And it's starting with a play of the thing we wanted to run against was our database servers. So it collects some information from the host and then starts running the tasks that are associated with that role, which I've called DB. This is my database role. So I use PostgreSQL and install it and configure it and run all of its stuff. And each of these tasks is referred to as idempotent. And that just means that you can run it safely multiple times, and then the first time it will apply the change, and every time after that it'll be safe to run and won't be destructive or modifying things again. Like here, it's, this might read kind of in a scary way of creating the database. It's only creating a database if the database didn't exist. Since the database does exist, it says, okay, this is already here, so let's move on. So it runs through that, and it runs through each role that I've defined in my whole site configuration. So I have messaging stuff. This is actually what Celery is running on. I told you that Celery is a system that works with RabbitMQ or different brokers, as they're referred to. So when you create a task from a web process and it gets added to a queue, and the worker pulls off that queue to actually do the work, this is the queue itself, RabbitMQ, message queue. So that's that. I had to do some stuff with swap files back when the memory issue on DigitalOcean was not quite so friendly. I installed some node packages and some Datadog stuff for monitoring. There's a lot of stuff in here. And I'm happy to dig into any of those things in the future, or if you want to look at the repository and check it out, you're welcome to do so and ask me questions. So we got to the bottom, and here we are, and it seemed like everything went well. So let's kind of scan back up to the worker section, and this changed. So this template right here is the addition of Celery conf to the final output location. So we can go in here. I need to be careful because I don't remember. This is my staging environment, so I don't remember how many settings I have in here. What I'll probably do for a moment before we actually dig in and look at the final output is turn off the video screen. I apologize with this. I really need to figure out a cleaner way to do this. I'm going to turn this off just for a moment so that I can go to the supervisor directory and look at the file and see if it's got secret stuff in it or not. Okay, it doesn't, so that's all good. Let's open this back up. Okay. So what you can see here is that the only environment variable that got added was this Django settings module. I used to have this configured differently so that there were a bunch of settings that got dumped in here of like passwords and all that stuff, and I decided ultimately that I don't like putting passwords and things in environment variables, because if environments ever got read and dumped out, it'd be super easy to just suck out all of my private data. So I moved away from that model and moved to a different model that I think is safer. But you can see the supervisor has both of these things going. If this is working as we hope, there should be a Celery beat log file now here. So let's check it out. Var log, what's in here? Celery beat. Great. So it looks like it's running. The Crontab, if you recall, is for like Sunday, so it's not going to actually run this. But I think it proved that we managed to get Celery beat onto our staging environment, and it seems to be doing what we want. It's logging. If we look at temp, and there's both the Celery beat PID file and the Celery beat schedule are safely in temp where we want them to be. So I think this gives me the confidence that that Celery beat is configured properly. And the nice part about this is now that we've done this to staging, I don't have to make any more code changes to take this to production. This is not something I have to add to production and do this again. This is the same configuration that will go to my production website. So that's pretty cool. So what's left to do? Let's check it out. So we did our configuration of Ansible, and we just checked it on staging. And let's do a deploy on the stream. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, goodness. So it's very important to automate as much of your deployment stuff as you can, because if you have anything that's manual, it will make your life harder, especially if something goes wrong and you have manual steps, then you need to remember everything. So Ansible is nice in that, and Ansible is not the only tool. I mean, I don't want to make this seem like it's a panacea. There are other tools that can do a great job, but Ansible is nice in that it has allowed me to automate all of this. So it's my deployment to my production environment is the exact same as what you just saw when I ran Vagrant Provision. So when I go to my staging environment, I run Vagrant Provision and it deploys there. Likewise, when I go to my do my actual deployment, I run a make target of make deploy, which under the covers is really just calling Ansible Playbook. It's giving an inventory, which is my the actual IP address of my server that I care about, and then saying which playbook do I want to run. And that site YAML file is all of the things that we looked at earlier. So when it was going through each of the roles, the database role, the messaging role, the web role, the worker role, and so on, it's really just running down from top to bottom that list of stuff. So I think everything is ready to go, and we can try to deploy. Let's go. This process is a little bit slower than doing it to my Vagrant machine, which makes sense because instead of SSHing into a local virtual machine, I actually have to go out to the internet and make an SSH connection. So this will take a little bit longer. I don't expect it will take too terribly long. This whole process usually takes a handful of minutes. But what do we cover today? I guess now is a decent time to review. We looked at Celery. So I'll type some things over here. So we looked at Celery and Celery is a background. It's a background job system. And we looked at Celery Beat, which is a scheduler for Celery. And to do the actual configuration of Celery Beat, the way I did it was very much by design of starting with a minimal test case, which if you are joining later in the stream, we started off by having a dummy task that we could call and to confirm that Celery Beat was even working. And then once we had that, we were then able to switch it over to the real task that I didn't want to run because it was going to do a bunch of extra work that could mix the results of the testing. So we had a minimal test case to prove that it worked, and we did all that locally. I think that's a strong thing. If you can have your local environment be pretty robust so that you can test out these kind of tools that you're going to use, I think that will suit you well. If you're at where I'm at, or even before where I'm at, where you don't even have a software as a service that you're starting or that you've started, there are a lot of ways to do it, and you're going to hear about a lot of tools that might help. So you might run into something like this, for example, Kubernetes. I think Kubernetes is a great tool. I don't think it's the tool that I would recommend starting with, because it's an involved tool. It's meant for Google size scale. So it just means that the amount of overhead to get a tool like that running for a business that is not even off the ground yet is kind of crazy. So that's a recommendation that I would have, to try and keep something simpler if you can. Your infrastructure will grow as your business grows, or stay the same if your business isn't growing. Like, I've been running my project for a couple of years, and this has been perfectly adequate for me to have as a tool to do this. So Kubernetes, I guess I should add, may not be the answer, or likely isn't the answer if you're just starting. So pick a tool to get you going. And another thing to even consider before even stating this is that to get this much going and to get a deploy like this going is a fairly substantial amount of work. And it's a substantial amount of knowledge on top of that to configure a server. So if I were going to start a software as a service today, I'm not even sure I would worry about this. I might pick a platform like Heroku or Python Anywhere if you're Python specific. There are a bunch of services that are referred to as platform as a service that what they get you is speed. They get you the speed of not having to worry about any of this infrastructure stuff, with the trade-off of a little, they're going to be more expensive in the end, because you're paying for them to manage that. You're also paying for, you have to write your applications in such a way that kind of plug into that environment and can easily be swapped around. So you got to read the documentation, but my point is that there's more than one way to do this. So we started with our minimal test case. We proved out that it works. We've highlighted that, Ansible may not be the way, but maybe Kubernetes might not be the way either. But then we took what we did locally and we put it into the framework that Ansible likes, a template, and deployed it to my staging environment. In the staging environment, we're able to explore around, confirm that it generated all the files that we actually care about, and get confidence. So maybe there's the other lesson worth writing down. Staging is your friend. And what I mean by that is growing confidence from one environment to the other. So by the end, if everything is working correctly, I should be able to now go to my production environment, and it should still be up. We should get to the bottom of this, and the deploy should still be fine. And the fact that we got through the worker section right here already is indicating to me that unless something else crashes that is unrelated to this, we're going to be okay. So I think that sort of closes out the work that I want to do this evening. And let's check that box. Give me the satisfaction of completing something. And I'm going to do this for a couple weeks going forward. So I did some other things that were like the other big item that I did in a previous stream was making configurable Stripe subscriptions. But I, again, didn't fully close the loop on that. So I want to get into a habit on the stream of, I plan to continue this. I don't want to just show you cool stuff and then go do the kind of the other bits later. I want you to see the full picture that goes behind this and what I'm actually doing to make all this run. Let's check it out. Let's see. Is College Conductor still up? Hey, it's still up. Cool. And I can check my Datadog stats and all that stuff later to confirm that the workers are doing that, but I'm going to leave that part alone. So we successfully got to the end. This is completed issue. It's always satisfying to click that close button. If you've done GitHub long enough, you know any sort of task that you have long running that you get done is nice. So getting back to the point though, I'm going to continue on this sort of path. There was this configurable product stuff that I did with Stripe a couple weeks ago, and I ended the stream and was unable to work on Conductor in between then and now, basically. So much so that before I got to the stream tonight, I had changes sitting in my repository that I had not even committed yet. Shame on me. So I want to finish that off. I want to go through and take what I showed you, or any of you that watched, which was configurable models and configurable data, and plug it into all of the right places in the site and show you how to modify all of the templates and make sure that they're all working, as well as a couple of lessons that I learned along the way of what I needed to change about it. And then we'll finally be able to move on to something new. I do have other things in mind that I want to show off that I've tried to add some of them to my issue list. So if you want a sneak peek of what's coming ahead for streams in the future, it's probably these top few issues. This is another service that I want to integrate with, which is called Prompt. It's for college essay prompts. So I want to be able to pull from that website, do a little bit more web scraping, and collect information about schools, and then display it with schools on the site. So that's a bit more of like the business side of this, and what is actually, who am I serving with this client, these customers. We're going to finish up the configurable subscription stuff, which I just mentioned, and then I want to get to some kind of design elements. So some of my pages in my onboarding process specifically are rather they're kind of dull. I use oh my gosh, I'm gonna blank on Font Awesome. I love Font Awesome. It's a great set of icons, but I kind of stretched them farther than I think they should. I took some icons and I blew them up to their biggest size, put a big circle around them, and made it as like that as an image, because I don't have the design chops to go and make custom images. But I was recently introduced to Ondraw, which is an excellent set of scalable vector graphics. And not only are they scalable vector graphics SVGs, they also, you can configure the color to make them fit with whatever site you're developing. So I intend to find some of these that would be useful and talk about how I incorporate them into the design of my site, where to put them, just go through that whole process of, I've done a lot of work to show you backend stuff, but I also did all the work to do the design elements of this. So there's a lot of CSS, there's a lot of front-end bits about this that I haven't covered that I think are interesting, that we could all explore together to talk about what are these pieces here. So that's sort of the future that we're going to look at. So that, I think, brings us towards the end of the stream for the evening. A couple of notes. I will take this recording and post it to YouTube. So if you want to refer back to anything that I said here, you can skip around on YouTube, or if you ever miss a stream in the future and you want to learn more information and keep up what's going on with College Conductor, you're welcome to do that too. I will have that out basically shortly after each production of a stream. I run the stream every Wednesday at 9 p.m. or not every Wednesday. Sometimes I have vacation. I'm not going to commit myself to some crazy schedule. But I do plan to run next Wednesday, I think. Yeah, let's plan for that. And we'll go over some of these next things. So if you found this interesting, I'd love to, if you could do me a favor too, if you could share anything you thought was interesting on social media that you care about, whether that be Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I don't know where you are, but if you could share, that'd be helpful. Because I want to have more people here. I want to have questions at some point. And I see that there are some number of viewers on here, and I'd love to field your questions. Although, if I keep monologuing at lurkers, that's cool too. But I do love to hear feedback. I am MB Layman on Twitter, same as my GitHub handle. I think, actually, I forgot I have my banner up at the top. So hopefully you should be seeing stuff about my website and where you can contact me. And we'll do more of this in the future. I appreciate all of you who are able to attend, and happy to chat with you again next time. So until then, take care.